So here we are. Both of my clutch bags are stitched all the way around. I've removed all of the foam and lining from within that stitch line that we've done, and I have clipped out the curves and trimmed back the seam allowance of the external fabric down by about half. Now I should be able to just turn it through the right way. What I usually do is kind of put my hand inside and poke in those corners. This is the faux leather one, so this is thicker. And bearing in mind that I've used foam both front and back for these. So this is the thickest that it could be, really. This one also has the strap connector, so the one thing I will say is when you stitch over that, when you're sewing round, you do need to go quite slowly because it does get a bit thick there. You may even need to hand crank. So once you've got it turned through, pop your hand inside and push out those curves. I appear to have a stray thread there. Push out all the curves and smooth them with your fingers. Now, I roll them, and I roll them so that I can get them properly curved rather than jagged, because with some faux leathers that you kind of don't get a nice curve. You get almost like an angled edge on them, which I just don't like. And I'm just going to clip all the way round, push those curves out from the inside of my fingers, and just rolling them between my fingers and finger and thumb, popping a clip in to hold it in place. The same thing along the top edge here. You need your seam, the seam that you just sewed, to be right on the outside. If it's not, when you stitch, not only will it look odd, but you won't catch the raw edges of your lining within your top stitching, which is what you're trying to do, which is what you're going to do. So this is not a French seam, but it's very similar to a French seam. You should have no raw edges within your bag because they're all caught in this top stitching. So just manipulate, keep manipulating with your fingers until you've got it all through and you're happy with it. Now, if you've chosen to use something thicker than perhaps you should have done, and now you're looking at your bag and thinking, I'm never going to be able to stitch that, take a rubber mallet to it. Rubber mallet all around the outsides to make sure that the seams are really as flat as they possibly can be. You can leave clips on overnight, or you can put the whole thing under a heavy book or some weight overnight, which will just flatten it out. Now you can see there that I've literally clipped all of the way around. I'm now going to do exactly the same thing with my fabric one, and I'm slipping off my chair. So my fabric one is exactly the same. Just going to turn it through, so I'm pushing through those bottom curves, turning the whole thing right side out and pushing out those corners. Now, those curves, curved corners, curves of the edges, the bits on the top and the bottom, those bits. The beauty of fabric is that you can actually press it, which helps, so that will help with any thickness that you've got, but it shouldn't be as thick as, well, it won't be as thick as your, oh, I've got a little tiny bit there that I haven't caught in my stitching. Just going to go back over that. Actually, I think what I've done is I've actually managed to trim my stitching out when I trimmed out my, I'm just going to turn it back in the wrong way and just re-stitch again and just pull it, push it out. Yeah, that's fine. I think I just caught my stitching when I was taken out my base stitching. Again, roll between your finger and thumb to get everything so that seam is sitting right on the side. So with the fabric version, you can actually press it if you need to. So if you think it's feels a bit bulky at the sides, you can just give it a good press and that will take some of the bulk out. I think this is fine actually. I don't think I need to take anything out of here. And this is why we're only using the headliner, because the headliner is thinner. If you were to use the very thick, I'm just going to do my zipper up now. If you were to use the very thick foam, you'd just never get through it. It would be just too thick. I think possibly even an industrial might struggle to do that, unless you've got one of those beast machines that will go through everything. So there we are, that's now all clipped. And I'm going to stitch this one first because I've got the let me just check what I've got on the bobbin here, because the bobbin will show I've got bright pink. I do not want bright pink on the back. So let's find a bobbin that I can take that little bit off because I don't need that. There's more on there than I thought there was. I don't like putting thread over thread because it just, the trouble is you then end up, you never know how long it's been on there. So let's just load the bobbin up with an appropriate coloured thread. Remember, you're going to see the back and the front of your stitching, so do check that your bobbin thread is okay to be seen on the outside. Ideally, I would imagine that you'd probably want the same colour top and bottom, but you know, who am I to say you could have different coloured stitching on the back as you do on the front? Thread the top thread, so we've got a long thread top and bottom. You're kind of used to that, I'm sure. And we're going to top stitch around the outside of our bag, starting along the top edge where your zipper overlay is, your faux leather overlay is. And I'll show you why we start there once we've done the stitching. I'm not back stitching. I am increasing my stitch length a little bit, so now going up to about 3 3/4 because it's to do tiny stitching around the outside of here is too much, I think. So I'm just going to go slowly. And I'm top stitching at 1/4 inch. round the side of my overlay. Bottom curve. Slowly around the corners, curves, corners, oh, I don't know what they are, you know what I mean though. Now if you've added the strap connector, you'll be coming up to that about now, so go really slowly. If necessary, use a hump jumper. I'm not sure if I've got my hump jumper here to show you. Yes, I have. Use a hump jumper. For those of you who haven't seen a hump jumper before, often, I'm going to stop just for a second, often if you're going over an area that's really thick, you'll find that your machine will skip stitches, and the reason that the machine skips stitches is because, let me show you, we have a demonstration here. Your machine is, your foot is sailing along, and you come to a bulky bit and your foot goes up like that, and as soon as your foot loses contact with the fabric, or is at an angle, either coming up or going down over the other side, you find that you'll get skip stitches. What the hump jumper does is it goes underneath the foot to allow it to go up over that hump that you're coming to, hump jumper, therefore that's the name. And it allows the foot to stay flat as you go over a bump. And thus you don't always, it doesn't always work, you don't usually get too many skip stitches. If you haven't got a hump jumper, you can use a piece of rolled up cardboard or a needle case. Improvise. So we're coming up round to the top there, and we're going to try and meet up with that stitching that where we started. If I can, land in the same hole as I started with. So now I have 2 threads on the front and 2 threads on the back. Now I can't take the front ones to the back and tie them off because they'll show. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the threads from the front in through, open the zipper in through into the bag, so that that's actually, so that they're actually inside. So you can see they're inside the zipper there. We're going to do exactly the same with the threads from the back. This is why we start at the top, because then it's easily accessible. So just taking them through, bringing your needle out inside. Then you can take your 2 lots of threads and just tie them off inside. And what I would do, rather than just cutting them, is then We don't need them quite as long as this, so they are a little bit on the long side. So I'm going to trim a bit off. Is pop my needle into the lining and then out of the lining just a little way along. I'm going through the foam as well, so hands I feel a little bit sweaty, so I can't get hold of it. That's better. So that what you end up with is a couple of little sort of tassels there from the threads, and you can trim those threads, those tassels off, and you've actually buried your threads completely within the padding. Oh God, I've got thread everywhere. The padding of the bag. So that's my fabric version completed. I still need to put a clip on the side, and I'll show you how to do that when we've done our wrist strap. Now I'm going to change over my bobbins and stuff like that so that I can show you the leather. The faux leather is exactly the same. You just kind of have to go a bit slower because it's thicker. And say I've used foam top and bottom here. Unless you have a machine that you know can cope with foam and thickness, I wouldn't advise using it top and bottom. I would say just using it on the back is enough, unless you have a good machine that you feel you trust well enough to go through the layers. And now I've said this, my machine's probably going to be an absolute pain in the neck and not stitch through it. I've never actually sewn this faux leather before. It's been sat in my stash for a couple of months, so I thought I'd give it a ping. It doesn't feel too thick, so I'm hoping that my assumption that it isn't too thick isn't going to make me look like an idiot. Now I haven't malleted this or anything else, so I'm just going to give it a go as it is. So let's get it under the needle, and here we go. If you are going to leave the clips on overnight to try and flatten it, I would suggest not leaving wonder clips on. I would suggest using bulldog clips, the type of which you would get in a stationery store. They're less likely to mark your faux leather. So far so good. I'm just coming into the area where I've got a double layer of foam, so if there are going to be issues, that's where they'll be. But so far, okay. Okay, I appear to have, yeah, I've got a problem there. So I'm just going to trim that off. We've skipped some stitches there, so I'm just going to pull out my threads to the point where those stitches started skipping. I'm going to pull those out of the way because I'm going to need to use those to bury things afterwards. And I'm just going to give this part of my bag a little whack. I think it's probably just around those curves that's a problem. So let's just, I'm going to take those threads out of the way because I'm going to use those. I'm going to try and go back into the last stitch where I had stitches and I'm leaving long threads again. So what I want to try and do is actually go through the same holes because I've got a few holes there where looks like that was enough just to give it, I think it was just a little bit thick on that corner. Let's just get all those threads that I've got from where I've done my remedial work out of the way, and I will bury those in a moment. Now my thread's broken. That's just what I need. Okay. So rethread. I'm leaving a long thread where my thread's broken. I've got lots of lovely corrections to do here, and I'm just going to unpick my stitching on the top back a little way, just enough to be able to, if I can. Not that easy to do because this is a similar coloured thread. Hard to see. Not sure I'm going to be able to get this out actually. Yep, I am. There we go. Just be patient. It's not my middle name. Okay, so I've just got a bit of thread there that I'm going to use to bury my ends in. I'm going to start stitching again by hopefully dropping my needle back into the last hole. That's that. Just coming up to where that strap connector is, and you know when you've just had a blinding moment, you just realise that you're actually doing this with a size 14 needle, which is probably why this is not stitching as well as it might do, but I've got that needle in now, so I'm going to just carry on. So what I've done is I've raised my foot and inserted the hump jumper underneath the foot in the hope that it will, I may actually hand crank this across because, and I'm just going to push that forwards again because I'm not fully across that strap connector just yet. needle should just run off the, press a foot rod, it should just run off the other side of your hump jump and it just pops out. And go back to where we started. That just goes to show that even the teachers get it wrong sometimes. Right, so I've got those threads there that are at the top, which I can bury the same as I showed you just now. This bit where we had to go back because I had those skip stitches, I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to bring the front threads through into the bag, and I'm going to just pull those in on both ends where I started stitching. So I'm basically just going through the next available hole. It is a bit tight getting your hand inside, and you have to kind of get hold of the needle inside and give it a pull. Except for I've left the thread on the outside and pulled the needle out. So let's do that again. And then we're going to do exactly the same with these two threads on the back. And also with the ones where my thread broke. Just need to push that in. It's quite tough doing it through faux leather, but it's possible, it's doable. You might need to wear a thimble to kind of push it through as opposed to pulling it. My hands are a bit hot and sweaty as well, it's not helping. I can't keep hold of the needle. But the idea is that you're not going to have any knots or threads on the outside. Once you've done all of these and moved them all inside, you can turn your bag back in wrong sides out and tie off all of those threads inside. So this is where my thread broke. Again, I've got 4 pieces of thread, top and bottom. That's one. This one's only a short one because that's where I've had to unpick. So I'm going to pop my needle in, halfway in, and then I'm going to thread, because only a very small amount of thread. But that's the beauty of self-threading needles, is that you can actually kind of thread them once they're through almost. I just need to catch that. I can't get hold of it from the inside. Where is it? There we go, so that one's gone through. And then the same with these. So just pushing them through into the inside of the bag. Better that they're inside than outside. And you can tie them off and bury the thread ends inside of your bag without any bother at all. I think I've still got one to go. And again, that one's a short one, so just pushing my needle in, trying to go through a hole that's already in there so it's not so tough. Threading the thread onto the needle as it's in there already and pulling it through, and it's gone. So we've now got a whole load of threads inside that need to be tied off. And I'm going to take these ones from the top where we started and finished our top stitching and tie them off inside the same as I showed you just now with the fabric one. So back in, and what you should have inside, because you've enclosed all your seams, let me just show you, is you should have fully enclosed, all the edges of that lining fabric should be fully enclosed within that top stitching, so they disappeared. Which is why it feels a bit like a French seam. Your lining is fully attached inside as well, so you don't get a lining that's going to come out when you pull something out of the bag, which is always a bonus. Let's just get these through. Oh, that doesn't want to go through there. That's better. Bring it through to the inside. That's all through. Then tie them off. Once I've tied these off, I will be turning my bag right side so that it's lining side out, and tying off all of those other ones that I've just pulled through as well. But I'm going to bury these first. Ideally, we just want to hide everything that we don't want to see. We don't need to see all the stray ends, and we don't need to see how we've done our repairs if we needed to do repairs. Again, that's too long. So let's just trim off that end, and there we go. All done, except for I just need to turn it in the right way, in the wrong way, and tie off those threads inside. So I'm going to do that, and then I will come back to you and we'll have a little look at how we do our wrist strap.